Back when I was a new player, I was really interested in thrown weapons, but I just couldn't find a good way to make them work, so they were always a challenge for me as a budding Pathfinder optimizer to try and figure out how I could get them to work. And since then, a lot of new tools have come out for the thrown weapon builds, so I want to go over what options characters have now, what makes thrown weapons worth it, and all of that type of thing. So, with that, let's just get started with why even use thrown weapons in the first place. And for the most part, that's pretty simple. You want more damage than the normal ranged options, because with bows and whatever, you get to add no stat to your damage. You're just kind of doing your thing. But with thrown, the trait, you get to add your full strength modifier to the damage. So already we are looking at a very high dex character to get the accuracy and a high strength character to be able to get the damage in order to make the thrown weapons worth it. So that naturally means you're not really going to be able to do this on a Gish style character or some character that relies on a high mental stat. So we're really left with like pure martials that are interested in thrown weapons at all. And of course, most thrown weapons have a couple of very notable downsides, being action economy of making sure you can have a thrown weapon to throw it again the next turn, because if you run out of weapons to throw, you're gonna have issues, and drawing things as a full-on action in order to throw it can get very, very expensive in terms of your action economy very quickly. And then the other issue is they just don't have the range of normal ranged weapons. Because, like, you can even look at the short bow, which is considered to be a shorter range weapon for most of the true ranged weapons at a 60 range increment. And then you look at a lot of the thrown weapons, especially the Shuriken, which only has a range of like 20. And if you're going for a thrown trait on a melee weapon, forget about it. Stuff like the little axes, 10 feet. Whatever. Like, a lot of the thrown weapons have these shorter ranges and this action economy issue. So, let's start with how we can alleviate some of those issues. For the action economy one, there are really a few ways around it. The first one, which is probably the most obvious, is Returning Rune. This is just simply a rune, you apply it to a weapon, after you throw it, it comes back to your hand, no need to spend more actions on reloading, grabbing no one from the bag, or anything like that. It's back in your hand, ready to go again. Great. Another option is Quick Draw. And with a Thrower's Bandolier, you can of course have a lot of thrown weapons that are then ruined, and you can Quick Draw out a new one and chuck it all as one action. Again, another way to screw around that action economy. The third one is Shuriken. Reload a 0, you can draw it and throw it as one action. Great. Those are like the three major ways to deal with the action economy issues. Mind you, there is a fighter stance, which I'm just going to put over in this area, that has weapons rebound to you, but because of that range issue, you're very unlikely to be perpetually within first range increment all the time, so making that the key thing you're relying upon to have a weapon with runes is a little inconsistent at best. But, of course, if you are doing the variant rule where nobody has runes, and your bonuses are progressing automatically via automatic bonus progression, you can then do things like that and have it not be as punishing for when it doesn't work out. However, I find things like that to be a little too risk intensive to be a primary plan for a character. Because if my entire character that I'm building to be like a range melee hybrid whatever gets nullified by an enemy being 35 feet away from me, I'm not really happy with that kind of thing. I want to be able to make my attacks from further reach away, but maybe that isn't as big of a downside for you because you have a ranged throwing weapon with a lot more whatever. That can be fine. Oh, but before I move on from this section, I should mention that there is the tethered trait. And the good part about tethered is that, well, you can get that weapon back so you don't lose your runes entirely for throwing your weapon a little too far. Which, very, very good. However, I should mention that against intelligent enemies, throwing your magic weapon to their feet, still probably a bad plan because they can just pick it up and hold it. So, Risky, but theoretically possible, and also still action expensive. I wouldn't rely on it as like a main gameplay strategy. It's a little rough. Now, there are far fewer creative ways to get around the range issue other than have mobility to run at people and be able to kite from the mid-range, or a couple niche feats that are very, very strong with thrown weapons, such as Rogue's Strong Arm, which you can archetype into as early as level 4, because you just need Rogue Dedication to qualify for it, because it is a level 2 Rogue feat, and it just increases the range increment of thrown weapons by 10 feet. Very simple, very nice, especially if you're trying to make something like Shuriken work, which only has like a 20-foot range increment normally. The difference between 20 and 30 is a lot. And then there's also a Ranger feat that comes online at level 4 that doubles the range increment of all of your weapons. And that, again, can be really, really strong. So yeah, there you go. Those are the real ways to deal with the range increment issue. So you're going to naturally be a mid-range character rather than a sniper if you're going with thrown weapons. That's just kind of a trade-off that you need to pay in order to get this massive increase in damage that you get from being able to add a strength modifier. So now you should have a broad idea of what kinds of things like to use these thrown weapons, but I just quickly want to list off the classes that have some direct synergy with them. So that way, when you're planning out how you want to make a thrown weapon character work, you can start from my little bit of research, which may not be complete, but it should give you a good place to start. And I will also talk about some classes which you might think work, but actually have a little bit of a non-bow in there. So, let's get started. And this basically is my opinion on where the classes fall as a thrown weapon build. So, for Champion, the reason I put in debatably optimal is Champion already has some feats that synergize with ranged attacks, but they still like being closer so that they can get value out of their Champion reaction. So as such, they're kind of a natural fit if you want to do the thrown weapons. That way they can still threaten some amount of damage because they don't have damage in their kit naturally. At least, not that much damage in their kit naturally. So, of course, Champion is there. There are also some deities that can buff up the simple thrown weapons that might have slightly better ranges and whatever. Also gets a free returning rune just by leveling up to 3. Really, really good stuff from the Champion. Of course, Ranger also up there because they have quick draw, so they can get around the action economy of having the bucket of weapons inside a bandolier or something. They can use their hunted shot and all those types of feats with shurikens from the bag, so they can naturally have synergy there. They naturally have lower multi-attack penalty, so having an agile thrown weapon makes a lot of sense for their kit. They normally struggle to get damage on their ranged builds, so there you go. At least on the non-precision ranged builds. So it fixes that problem. It also then gives it damage type variety, and there are the other things that increase ranges of the weapons pretty early on. So it's a very natural fit for thrown weapon ranger. Pretty solid. Barbarian and Monk are in the, there are some clunkiness there. There's a little bit of clunk that you need to get through before you can really get to the whole thing. With Barbarian, it really is that lack of quick draw, that lack of the action economy being super efficient, and your bonus is to get that rage damage, but you can't be going the full giant instinct because then you get clumsy, so you're going to need to pick a different instinct, likely elemental or something along those lines. And then you can be pretty good in like the mid-range sniper duels, because now things have a chance to miss you due to flat checks, and you're still able to hit them for good damage. You just do need to figure out some way around the action economy thing, or sacrifice the rune to get returning. You're going to need to do a little bit more work to get the Barbarian there, but it's really close, and that's why it's in that tier. Monk has a definitive ranged build. It has like the monastic weaponry and the shooting star stance and all this other stuff to naturally make Shuriken's good. But the issue with that build is really, well, you're fundamentally going to have to burn a lot of feats to get there. And the reason that makes Bowmonk so good is you can do all of your on hits that you normally only get on unarmed strikes with bows. So you can stunning strike with a bow from range. That's what makes the Bowmonk so scary. And it becomes very, very feat intensive for the thrown weapon monks to get anywhere close to that. And again, it can become pretty action economy expensive if they want to use anything that is not a shuriken. So they are still pretty clunky. And in the few notable issues tier, I put Swashbuckler and Rogue together because they both have a kind of similar issue of it can be really hard to trigger their class gimmick. Because, you know, Swashbuckler needs to get panache. And the only ways it has to really get panache from range involve charisma skills, but you want to invest strength to make your thrown weapons really worth it. But then you get the panache to damage, so they do have the thing, but you need to solve like the stat spread issue as well as the types of things that the other would need to solve, but does have quick draw, much like Rogue. So honestly, these tiers are a lot more fluid than just these blocks would have you believe. These could be debatably up here. Barbarian could be debatably up here, but I put them this way because I do think that there is a gap between the monk and the swashbuckler, because the monk's only issue it needs to solve is it spends a few more feats than I'd like. The swashbuckler has to have a fundamental issue with the class chassis it needs to solve. Same thing with Rogue, because it can be very hard to get flat-foot on range attacks consistently. Unless you have like a grappler in the party that's already in melee, already doing a thing, then the Rogue slides up to like here, maybe here with the throne build. But if you don't have a grappler in your party, or you don't have control of your party comp, like you're in a drop-and-play system, such as ETT over on World Rules Layer, Pathfinder Society, or even the Dragon Club here at UC Davis, you're gonna have some issues with the consistency of how often you can get sneak attack, and if you're not consistently getting sneak attack, playing a rogue is just kind of rough. Fighters here, because while it does have that incredible accuracy, and it really wants to have the damage on its range builds, it doesn't really have, like, enough feats that are solving the issues in a way that I like. But its class chassis is just baseline so good to have a melee range hybrid. And also with the bandolier, you can pull out a weapon with the thrown tray and just hold it as a melee weapon, and that's great. Needing to limit yourself to one weapon group starting at level 5 in order to get the most out of the fighter accuracy also can be pretty rough, because a lot of the advantage of thrown weapons is changing out weapons from the bandolier or doing the returning thing. And if your goal is to just do the returning thing, I think that it might be better to just use a bow and then have that rune that you would use on returning be a rune that you use on flaming, or another one of the just add some flat damage to the thing. So, as such, I'm not too high on the thrown weapon fighter, and I say thrown weapon alchemist can work as well, because it gives you something to do when your bombs aren't really active. And also, alchemist naturally wants to be throwing bombs, so there's a lot of overlap in the feats that they could use to improve their main strategy, and the thrown weapon secondary strategy. Now, clerics, bards, I kind of put them there because these are a couple things that can get access to these weapons. They can get a more martially focused build, and they can focus entirely on utility spells, like clerics can just prepare heal and buff spells a lot, bards can prepare soothes and buff spells a lot, and they can make that work to a good extent, and thus make it look like a real build. But it's possible to make it work. You're going to need to deal with a lot of issues, and I would not recommend it, but it can definitely work. Investigator, you're going to get very, very multi-attribute dependent, basically no matter what you're doing, but you can use thrown weapons as like a secondary supplementary option if you wanted to build something with like maybe a finesse thrown weapon so that you can have some melee options, and or use shurikens, so that way you can have an agile range option that's in the back pocket. I can see the Investigator having some sauce and like a weird build, but I don't think that interacts too well with the devise a stratagem thing. The other note is you could devise a stratagem and have a bunch of different poisons on different range weapons, but you could also just do that with arrows and a bow. So the real reason I think that Investigator is there is because it goes along with the backup plan of the athletic stratagems. That way, if you see that nat 20 come up, you can then run up and disarm, get their weapon out of their hands. And that's really why it's here, because there is a way to do a strength Investigator, and I think thrown weapons might be one of the better ways to utilize it. But I still think it's on a heavy level of jank. Same thing with Oracle. Oracle, basically, you go Battle Oracle, you do the same kind of thing the Cleric and Bard are doing, primarily take buff spells, blah, 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 blah. Inventor, same multi-attribute dependency problem. You're going to run out of stat boost very quickly, but at the higher levels, the multi-attribute dependentness kind of falls away because you can get strength decently high and whatever. Magus, action economy issues all the way through. You can't really quick draw spell strike, so... And I'm not really happy to be spell striking with shurikens if I'm a shooting star magus. So yeah. Druids, same kind of thing of you could in theory put wisdom a bit lower, go into the strength dex type thing, go for thrown weapons, maybe do a shapeshift if you want to get into melee. I could see that working. I just think that why? Thaumaturge, again, kind of the why. You already have a thing that can get you bonus damage for investing in a stat. So why not just invest, you know, charisma dex and use a bow? But yeah. And then the super wide tier. These are classes I think just have better options, period. Like, I couldn't even justify a jank build to justify a thrown weapon on them as a primary source of damage. Psychics, your cantrips are just so much better than simple weapon throwing. Gunslingers, you're giving up fighter accuracy and your reload actions. I don't see why you would. Sorcerer, again, you're giving all this up for simple thrown weapons. Just use your spells that are good. Summoner, same kind of shtick, but now you also have an Eidolon competing for that multi-attack penalty, which... Cantrips, Wizard, just use cantrips, Kineticist. You already have a built-in high damage ranged option. You do not need thrown weapons. And, yeah, that's basically my super overview guide of how to make thrown weapons work in Pathfinder. So with that, I'm going to swap back to my main... Oh, that's not... Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Subscribe for more overview guides like this one. And yeah, that's all I have for you today. Peace.